There's a hidden detail in the final 2 minutes that almost everyone missed. When danger appears, the background characters stop reacting entirely. No panic, no flinching, no urgency. They don't even look at each other. They just stand there, motionless. At first glance, it feels like a production shortcut. But the more you think about it, the more disturbing it becomes. This isn't about budget or extras. It's visual storytelling. The show is proving that the world itself has learned how to dissociate. The apocalypse didn't just destroy society, it trained people to endure horror without responding to it. What makes this so unsettling is how quiet it is. There's no dramatic cue telling you to feel afraid, no music spike, no visual emphasis. The stillness is the message. Fallout is showing us a world where danger no longer interrupts daily life, where fear has been absorbed into routine, and that's far scarier than chaos. Something else happens in these final moments that feels intentional. Emotional beats never get to fully land. Just as a character should react, the scene cuts away, again and again. The show denies us catharsis on purpose. Faces are framed closer than usual, but reactions are shorter. The camera moves in, but the emotion pulls back. It feels wrong, and that discomfort isn't accidental. The ending refuses to let us process anything fully. It doesn't allow grief, it doesn't allow anger, it doesn't even allow shock. It keeps interrupting emotional release until you realize something important. This world doesn't process trauma anymore. It moves past it. Not because it healed, but because stopping would be inefficient. That idea shows up everywhere in the visuals. Symbols that used to feel nostalgic now feel flat. Vault insignias, old-world tech, familiar jingles. They aren't framed with warmth or irony anymore. They're shown plainly, almost unattractively. Fallout isn't romanticizing its own iconography anymore. It's stripping it of meaning. That's a massive tonal shift. For most of the franchise, nostalgia was a coping mechanism, a way to soften devastation with humor and familiarity. This episode rejects that entirely. The symbols are still there, but they feel hollow, like furniture that's been in the room too long to notice.
Even the final reveal is treated differently. There's no dramatic pause, no music cue, no sense of a twist. The information is presented like a fact, something that simply exists. That choice reframes the ending completely. This isn't shock, it's inevitability. The world doesn't react because the world already expected this. And when the episode ends, it doesn't explode, it shrugs. That might be the scariest decision the show has made all season. Because what the ending is really saying is this: the greatest threat in Fallout right now isn't a faction, it isn't technology, it isn't violence, it's normalization. The Easter eggs aren't there for fun anymore. They're proof that horror has become furniture, things people live around. When atrocities become routine, resistance stops looking heroic. It starts looking inconvenient. That idea changes how you read the entire season. The jokes without punchlines, the violence without escalation, the reveals without reaction. This isn't numbness as trauma. This is numbness as culture. Fallout isn't building toward a war, it's building toward a world where nothing feels worth fighting over, because everything terrible is already expected. And once you see that, the ending doesn't feel empty, it feels intentional. The comparisons this ending brings to mind aren't accidental. This episode feels deeply aligned with films and stories that explore exhaustion instead of spectacle. Stalker from 1979 comes to mind immediately, not because of visuals, but because of atmosphere. In that film, devastation becomes so familiar it stops feeling dramatic. The danger doesn't announce itself, it just exists. Fallout is doing the same thing here. The apocalypse isn't loud anymore, it's background noise. I also couldn't stop thinking about Disco Elysium, especially the way that game treats systems as things that outlive belief. People keep participating in structures long after they stop trusting them. Meaning erodes, but routines remain. Fallout's ending feels built on that exact idea. The systems still function, the world still moves, but nobody seems to believe in it anymore. Even Neon Genesis Evangelion fits here, not for giant monsters or spectacle, but for emotional exhaustion disguised as acceptance. Characters who look calm, but only because they're too tired to react. Fallout is tapping into that same emotional frequency. This isn't shock-driven storytelling anymore. It's about what happens after despair becomes boring. That's why the Easter eggs feel different now. They aren't rewards, they're debris. Recognizable, yes. Comforting, maybe. But hollow. Cultural leftovers that no longer carry meaning. Fallout is no longer using nostalgia to soften the blow. It's interrogating nostalgia itself. And that's a bold pivot for a franchise built on iconography. The show is asking an uncomfortable question. At what point does remembering the past stop being respectful and start being avoidance? My emotional reaction to the ending surprised me. I didn't gasp. I didn't lean forward. I went quiet. That's rarer. I realized halfway through the final moments that my shoulders were tense, not because something dramatic was about to happen, but because I was waiting for emotional payoff that never came. I actually paused the episode, not because I was confused, but because I felt dismissed, like the show had refused to acknowledge my need for closure. And then it clicked. That discomfort was the point. The episode made me feel ignored the same way the world ignores suffering now. No release, no relief, just continuation. The scene doesn't end, it just stops. And that feeling lingers longer than any cliffhanger ever could. This is where episode 7 quietly becomes one of the most disturbing entries in the season. Not because of violence, but because of restraint. It refuses to give you permission to feel strongly. It denies you emotional escalation. Psychologically, this isn't weakness, it's adaptation. These characters aren't fragile, they're efficient. They've learned which emotions are useful and which ones slow survival down. The show is arguing that meaning doesn't disappear in catastrophe. It gets rationed. Only certain emotions are allowed to survive. Fear, maybe. Mild hope, sometimes. But outrage, grief, moral urgency, those are luxuries now.
Symbolically, the Easter eggs function like museum pieces no one visits anymore. The world keeps them around, but they don't inspire anything. Fallout is questioning whether nostalgia itself has become a coping mechanism that prevents change. The sound design in the final scene reinforces this idea perfectly. It's almost antiseptic. Ambient noise stripped of texture. Everything feels processed, efficient, like a simulation running smoothly. Even the lighting avoids contrast. No deep shadows, no highlights. Everything exists at the same visual temperature. Nothing stands out anymore, not even danger. And when a world reaches that point, you start to understand what the real threat is. Not destruction, not control, but acceptance. Looking ahead, this ending doesn't feel like a conclusion. It feels like conditioning. And that's why my strongest prediction isn't about conflict or war. It's about denial. I think Season 3 will open without directly addressing this ending at all. No recap, no reflection, no emotional processing, just life continuing. That choice would double down on the idea that nothing feels urgent anymore. A more probable direction is smaller but more revealing. I think a character will eventually break down over something minor, not a death, not a massacre, something trivial, a joke that doesn't land, a routine interruption, a personal inconvenience. That breakdown would prove something critical. The numbness isn't total, it's selective. People haven't stopped feeling, they've just stopped feeling about the important things. And here's the wild prediction. I think the show introduces a community that actively rejects Fallout culture. No music, no relics, no jokes, no iconography. They don't collect the past, they refuse it. And they'll be treated as extremists, dangerous, unstable. Because in a normalized apocalypse, caring too much becomes the radical act. The logic tracks. When suffering is expected, outrage feels disruptive. When despair is routine, hope looks naive. Fallout is slowly reframing morality itself. Resistance doesn't look heroic in this world. It looks inefficient.
This is why Episode 7's ending matters so much. It's not about what happened. It's about how little it mattered to the world around it. That's the real horror. Not destruction, but but desensitization as survival strategy. Psychologically, the characters aren't surrendering, they're optimizing. Emotion becomes a resource, carefully allocated. Symbolically, the past becomes decoration, not guidance. Fallout is asking when remembering stops being respect and starts being avoidance. The episode suggests that meaning doesn't vanish and collapse, it gets controlled. Only emotions that don't disrupt systems are allowed to remain. Everything else gets quietly edited out. And that brings us back to the final images. The stillness, the lack of reaction, the absence of escalation. The world doesn't panic because panic no longer serves a purpose. It doesn't fight because fighting assumes things can change. That's the bleakest idea Fallout has ever presented. Not that the world ended, but that people learned how to live inside its ending. At some point, resilience turns into emotional surrender, and the show is daring us to ask whether we've crossed that line already. Are the Easter eggs rewards for loyalty, or are they indictments for comfort? And if a world ends slowly enough, do people even notice when it's finally gone? Episode 7 doesn't end with a bang. It doesn't end with a twist. It ends with acceptance. And that might be the most honest apocalypse story Fallout has ever told. Because Fallout isn't asking how the world was destroyed. It's asking why we kept living exactly the same afterward. And that question doesn't fade when the episode cuts to black. It follows you.